Hey there and welcome back. This is Felix from Hermet Vintage Watches. Today let's talk about the IWC Hermit, a watch that many of you are probably not familiar with. Although from a distance it looks like any other IWC dress watch, okay? But it is actually one of the rarest and most sought after IWC dress watches on the market today. A few details make this watch stand out. And as always, it is the details that make a watch. It's hard to imagine that there was a time when watches were very sensitive and breakable. Today, if you go to a watch boutique, it seems almost normal that watches have to be 10 ATM water resistant, shock resistant, with unbreakable sapphire crystal, and so on and so forth. How luxurious. So I find it very fascinating to take a look back at the early days, when watches were just starting to become more durable. And every bit of new technology meant several years of life for a watch. So what were the first steps on this long road to durability? And what role did the IWC Hermit play? This beautiful, rare and very well preserved Hermit was made in 1941 and is one of the more obscure yet iconic models IWC produced at the time. Extremely slim and at 36.5 mm, incredibly large for the time. This beautiful watch is a real treat on the wrist. Known as a Hermit, this watch has a tightly sealed caseback and an inset crown that hermetically seals it from moisture and dust, hence the name Hermit. The dial itself is a design masterpiece as well, which is very balanced thanks to the concentric circles and applied numerals. The case design is also unique with an integrated crown, which is rarely seen on dress watches of this era. If you ask me what I associate with IWC Schaffhausen today, it is clearly the desire to produce resistant watches, starting with material development and ending with their ultra-resistant Big Pilot shock absorber XPL, which is said to withstand impacts of over 30,000 Gs. As much as I like the idea of these real-life science fiction watches, the very humble beginnings of the development of increasingly rugged watches may be even more impressive. Long before sapphire crystal and modern alloys, it was difficult to make watches that could withstand a knock or two. The renowned brand from Schaffhausen, of course, had its own unique approach, and it did so more than 80 years ago. However, the protagonist this time is not the classic action hero. It's about an elegant and sophisticated dress watch. So here's the story of the IWC Hermit. With a slow transition from pocket watches to wristwatches in the early 20th century, IWC began to increase production of smaller movements as well. One of the great early movements of the manufacturer and its time is undoubtedly the Caliber 83, introduced in 1931. It is fair to say that the heart of the Hermit was a classic of its time. In addition to the more elegant examples, the Caliber 83 was used in military legends such as the famous Mark X military watch from the Dirty Dozen and the extremely rare Mark X pilot's watch from the late 1930s and early 1940s. It's interesting to see that the trend for rugged everyday watches didn't just start yesterday. It now has a long tradition. The Caliber 83 was obviously very effective. But the movement is only one variable in the durability equation. What's about the case? And here we finally come to the essence of the so-called Hermit. The cases came in a variety of sizes from 32 mm to a maximum of 38 mm. But they all had in common the tightly sealed caseback, graduated bezel and recessed crown. As mentioned earlier, the case features were meant to hermetically seal the watch from dust and moisture, hence the name. But to me, these necessities have their own aesthetic appeal. So take a closer look at the fluted crown for a moment. It gives the watch a slimmer look as it blends perfectly into the overall shape. From a distance, it looks almost perfectly symmetrical, while in reality, it is the only detail that makes perfect use of the graduated bezel. IWC have really made a habit of using robust movements for elegant timepieces. And it's clear from the dial that the Hermit collection wasn't really intended to be a classic military watch either. The dials mostly featured two-tone sector divisions with small seconds and leaf hands, and were classically white, silver or black. It's truly the late Art Deco, 1940s spirit that speaks from this design. And it speaks also directly to my heart. The spirit of the 1940s is clearly there. If we apply our design age algorithm to the specifications, hands marker, style color, case shape, bezel shape, size, materials, etc., we can clearly see that the Hermit is a spiritual child of its time. Interestingly, when we divide it into a smaller, more military-looking variant, a black dial with syringe hands, we can observe that the tip shifts to 1940 compared to an oversized, more elegant variant with white dial and leaf hands with a tip around 1946. All this leads us to a very interesting development in the middle of the last century. Making watches resistant to harmful environmental conditions became an important thing. A thing for everyday watches, not just military pieces. And it goes beyond water resistance. The Inca block, which makes the balance wheel more shock resistant, began its triumph in 1938. In the 1950s, magnetic shielding became another important factor for manufacturers. See for example IWC's Mark X in 1948, Rolex Milgau's 6451 in 1956, Omega's Realmaster CK2914 in 1957, and Patek Philippe's 3417 in 1958. Thus, starting in the late 1930s, the Hermit marks a very important cornerstone in civilian watchmaking. All the developments that have led to our modern certified timepieces began then. We now have watches that are far more rugged than our current lifestyle require. So always remember the humble beginnings of IWC's Hermit. A watch with true class that, although built to last, has not scarified a single ounce for aesthetics. It's as great as it gets because it combines technological marvels and a balanced design. And that's all to this beaut, so have a great day and I hope to see you in our next video.